So good morning, everybody. I'm Tim Mundy and I am a recruiter. I've been doing it for about 9 years now, and the reality is in all that time I've rarely actually referred to myself as a recruiter when out in public. You've probably met people like me before. We'll call ourselves search specialists, researchers, consultants, market mappers, my latest incarnation, which is strategic sourcer. We basically call ourselves anything except what we really are. And the reason we do that is because once we do, we can sort of see this sort of veil of stereotypes start to fall around us, and we know that you've probably got a bit of a picture in your mind as to what we are. I think it's probably fair to say that, even now people are probably thinking, I've seen these guys before, they're like used car salesmen, They're selling me something, but I know that they probably got it for a lot less than I'm paying, and I get a really strong sense here that I'm not getting value for money. And to be honest, that's kind of completely fair. The reality is that for decades now, the recruitment agency industry, it really has been robbing the employer blind. When I first started in my first agency, I'd been working in a bar just a week before. I didn't know anything about the corporate world whatsoever. And I go into this agency on my first day. They give me one of the biggest brands in Australia to manage. They say, okay, Tim, here's telephone company A, you're going to manage that as an account. This telephone company, I may currently work for them, so my words are my own today and my opinions are my own. And so they say, okay, see what you can do with these guys. I go, okay, cool. So I ring up my client and I say, and you've probably heard this spiel before, I say, hi, I'm Tim Mundy, I'm a specialist in the sales and marketing industry, and I can really add value to your recruitment process. I'd love to come out and have a chat to you. And they say, okay, cool. So I go out and meet with them and have a bit of a chat, and I end up getting these key senior marketing roles to recruit for. So I'm pretty happy. I think I've done a pretty good job. I go back to my office and I think, okay, what am I going to do? These guys actually, have given me an opportunity here. And so I jump into the mythical database that all agencies talk about, this amazing source of people that, we have. But literally I had to blow the dust off this thing. It hadn't been looked at in 6 months. Nobody had even touched the thing. And so I go, okay, well, this is what I've got to work with. So I jump into this database and I go, okay, well, what will I search on? So I go, marketing manager, that's what I'm recruiting for. Melbourne, that's my location. I go, Optus. Because I think, well, if I'm recruiting for telephone company A, I'm going to go for telephone company B. So I pull out, sort of half a dozen or, 10 odd resumes, and I start looking at these people and go, cool, I'll start calling them up. And I talk to them, I say, okay, I've got these marketing roles, you interested in an opportunity? And they say, yeah. And I say, cool, because I've got exclusive rights to recruit for these and love to send you details across. So I send these across to my client, and about a week later and about an hour's worth of work, my agency ends up sending that client an invoice for $90,000, right, for that effort. So those days are just completely gone now, and there's two things that really changed that for us. LinkedIn and the GFC. So I walk into work one day and it was like that tap had been turned off. It was just, everything was gone. And it sort of may sound a little bit profound, but LinkedIn was essentially responsible for all of that. Well, what it had done is it had given employers, we had the means and now a tool to go directly out to the candidate market, find anybody we wanted to and speak to them directly. Now, in agency, that was the ace that we'd had up our sleeves. It was our point of difference. We created an industry as a third-party middleman, and we traded off this idea that you had to engage an agency to go out and speak to people directly. But that just wasn't the case anymore. And so I'm sitting there and going, okay, well, what am I going to do next? I'm going the way, why would anybody want to pay somebody like me all that money when they can just go out and directly speak to people themselves? So I think to myself, well, I'm going the way of bookstores here, or retail or CD stores. Well, what am I going to do with myself? So I guess I had a choice. I had to evolve. And like a lot of people, I decided to move into an internal role and go client side. And that was a pretty crazy time. You had thousands and thousands of recruiters moving into these internal roles. We all had access to this same candidate market at the same time. And so everybody was out there shouting at people, trying to get to them. There was no rules or etiquette around what we were doing yet. For us, I guess it was a little bit like what would happen in a few months' time when, Facebook would open up to brands and companies would just go on these massive fan acquisition benders. It was a really confusing time for the candidate or the customer market because everybody was out there shouting at people. And so somebody, or something had to make sense of all of this. We had to put some process around it. And that's when the role that I do now in the industry that I'm in really evolved and was almost sort of reborn overnight. And so I end up internally working for the brands that I've been recruiting for all this time. And I'm sitting there and I think, actually this role that I'm in, it's actually not too dissimilar for these marketing roles that I've been recruiting for. I've got jobs, I've got products, and I've got a brand that I'm working with. We had a proposition. We've got these channels that we've got, and we've got an audience that needed segmenting. And so I think to myself, okay, what do I need to do with this? But whilst that all sounds quite, sort of similar to maybe the world that a lot of people here work in, the asking price for our product was astronomical. So if you think about it, when was the last time you asked somebody to buy something where the asking price was at a minimum 2 years of their life? And our sales lead time, it could be years. So we had a very high involvement purchase that we were trying to sell. And so, what we had to do was develop a model, and, like any good marketer, I like a model. And so what we did was, we came up with something, and, the recruitment model that we work with is specific to us, but it should sound pretty familiar to people. We talk about 4 stages of recruitment as being find, track, attack, and retain. And so what I want to do is I want to go through each of these stages and just touch a little bit on each of them and how much they had to evolve for us and what we had to do to sort of stay ahead of that game. So in the first instance, we had to find people. Now, previously this was pretty easy because essentially we weren't really finding people. We were relying on them finding us. We had, big, broad advertising campaigns. We had newspaper ads, we had job boards, but that was pretty much it. And we were relying on the right person with the right skills, who was at the right stage in their career, to be on the right channel at the exact same time that we were advertising an opportunity that was right for our brand. So, we were essentially just praying. And what was happening was, everybody was out in these channels at the same time as well. So it was a very confusing space. And the one thing we realised was everybody was out there trying to get the best candidates on the market, but we didn't actually know if they were the best candidates in the market. And I guess if that notion had even occurred to us, we didn't have the means to do anything about it. So that, that's the space that we're out in. Flash forward to today, and it is just a totally different space for us. So I'll give you as an example where we're doing things now like looking into predictive behaviours. So we're digging into whether there are behavioural precursors that we can tap into and find to give us insights into people up to, say, a year before they're ready to move opportunities. So a really sort of simple example of this is the LinkedIn profile. So we're able to look at this and say, okay, if Tim here adds a photo where he didn't previously have a photo, if he suddenly adds a whole bunch of new connections, and let's say they're agency recruiters, if he gets a whole heap of endorsements, if he does all these things in a very short space of time, we can start to think there's something happening here that we could potentially tap into. There's a reason all these things are happening at once. That suggests to us this guy might be preparing himself to come onto a market and make a buying decision. What's really cool is that we've got tools now. You've got Bullhorn Reach here that will actually do this for us. So this tool it'll tap into my networks. And it'll tell me, hey Tim, Jim from the office here, he's made 7 profile updates in a week. It'll suggest to me that I want to go and speak to this guy and have a bit of a conversation because there are these precursor behaviours that are aligning with the idea that he may be ready to make a move. And so the key point is that there are predictable things here that are happening that can suggest to us people are moving towards a buying decision. What's really cool about that is we used to think that the starting point was when somebody came onto the active job seeker market and was looking for a role. But what we realise now is that it actually starts occurring way earlier, and we can identify that. And so that brings us on to tracking people. So once we've found people, that's fantastic. But we want to start following them and learning more about them, because the reality is that the second we find somebody, it's unlikely to be the same second that they are actually ready to look for a job. So what we want to do is we want to start following these people and learning about them so that we can understand when they are moving towards that buying decision. And I guess if it hasn't sort of started to sound creepy yet, it's about to, because the reality is everybody here, including myself, is being followed or stalked right now. So whether it's you as an individual, you in your industry, your profession, the reality is there are recruiters just like me that are out there looking into you and learning about your behaviours. And they're not just looking at whether it's your skills and whether you can do the job. So companies like the one that I work for, they've invested huge amounts in building and nurturing a culture that reflects the brand values that they have. And it's key to get people that will support that. So they're not just looking to see if you can do the job, looking to see if you're the right person to do the job with them or with us. And so one of the ways that we do this is digging deeper into what people are all about. So we have a role that we call field technician where I work at the moment. These guys are predominantly early 20s. They live all around Australia. But what we've learned is they love Japanese 4-cylinder turbo cars. We've also learnt that they love online gaming. We've also learnt that they're partial to a bit of cosplay. For those that don't know what cosplay is, it's essentially girls getting dressed up as video game characters. You can Google it, but I wouldn't suggest you Google it at work. So we find these guys and we learn all this about them. We've got that rich detail and we go, okay, what we want to do then is we go into Facebook groups about those topics. We go into their environment and we start learning about them. We start learning about what makes them tick. Because the idea is we want to understand what they want to talk about, how they speak, and what's going to engage them when we do open up a conversation. And so what that does is it brings us on to how we attack people. So attacking is about, it's about making that one pitch. It's about finding something that's going to resonate with that individual and tap into their drivers. We have a brand, we just call it an employment brand, and we have a value proposition, we just call it an employment value proposition. And what we want to learn is, how can we use that to speak to that individual? This used to be quite a sort of almost like a single-minded approach, and it was about finding that one thing that would resonate with the highest proportion of people possible. And, that made sense when you were in a world that was sort of constrained, when you were looking at, what you could fit on a billboard or just in a little newspaper ad or in a 30-second time slot. It was about finding that one thing and just shouting it from as many places as possible. But today, we've got unlimited space through digital. And that kind of is fantastic for us because we need to have, unlimited opportunities to craft messages. Because what we've learnt is all these different people that we're speaking to have different drivers. There's different reasons as to why they would want to buy your product or, take a job with us. So when we're marketing to them, when we're speaking to them, we're taking all that stuff into account when we're crafting our messaging. Who are they? What's their age, their gender, their interests, all these sorts of things so that we can get down to that individual level of communication. And I'll give you an example of this. So currently we recruit for management consultants. Initially we learnt that they're male, they're late 20s but predominantly early 30s. A bit more investigation showed us that they really like to travel. And that's quite a bit of information in itself, but we wanted to go to that next level down. And so what we did was we learnt that, yes, they like to travel, but where do they like to travel? Okay, we found out it was Southeast Asia. It's interesting. What do they do on their holidays? Predominantly, it's individual pursuits. So they're hiking, scuba diving, kayaking, rock climbing, but all the things that they're doing are about individual achievement. Now that's really interesting, right? When you start thinking about the role of a management consultant, there's a lot of synergy between those things there. So when you think about that, you go, okay, well, when we want to market to these guys, what can we do? What can we say that will appeal to that? What in our brand represents that? Who in our organisation could speak to that? But really importantly, when in their job with us will they get to scratch that itch? And so we craft messaging around that. And you can think then how different that might be to what we say to executive HR people who are predominantly female and mid-40s and have families. So it's about, different messages for different people. And so today, that one pitch, to the biggest audience possible, it just doesn't work anymore. But amazingly, in our industry, people are still doing that, which is great for us because they're probably recruiting for management consultants too. So that works out just well. So we've gone out, we've found you, we've tracked you, we've attacked you, and you used to be, well, that's kind of job done, right? But it's not. There's a whole other part to the equation, and And we sort of let that go. We've been so focused on going out, and I know this can be the same for other industries as well. We're so heavily focused on going out and finding the right people and drawing them back to our brand that we kind of forgot about making sure that we're delivering on what we're promising. And so, the biggest realisation for me early on when I went internal was that I would now see my customers every day in the elevator. They're there in the same building as me. So if I'd in some way misrepresented my product or hadn't sold it effectively, I was going to have to deal with that. You know, if I'd said, "Oh, you're going to come work in a really funky office," and they turn up and it's just some old guy in a cardigan sitting on a football, you know, clearly we've got different definitions of funky, but I haven't delivered on what I've told them. So, we really had to make sure we knew what we were doing there. So, the reason we do that is, we want to I guess we're starting to look at people as being lifetime customers now. You know, what can we do to retain them and their loyalty and them as an advocate? Because we know it's cheaper to keep a customer than it is to find a new one. So, we think about what else can these people do for us? Could they refer people or go out and become an advocate? In our organisation, we get around sort of 15,000 applications a month. Whether they get a job with us or not, that's 15,000 different experiences with our brand. So we need to think about what impact that can have. We need to think about how we can use digital channels to make that referral process easier. Because I know in our industry, referrals can account, well, in our company, referrals can account for up to 30% of hires. In a company like Deloitte, referrals can be 80% of hires. You think about that, that's 80% of your customers coming through other customers. So, ensuring that those people are being advocates for you is absolutely crucial. So I guess now, we're really looking at the long game. Are we delivering? We're looking back to see if we can find people, in some cases before they're even aware themselves that they're ready to make a move. We're looking to the future to ensure that we are creating and providing an environment that nurtures people and that speaks to what we've been promising. The reality is that, unless, like Dan says, unless you're in the recruitment industry or banking or insurance or, the porn industry, the reality is, you may not have gone through this huge tectonic shift yet, this evolution, but it's going to happen. I guess like it or not, you'll, like us, you'll be thrust into this world where you're forced to engage with your customers. And if you can't work out how to do it, somebody else will. If you think, if you're not sure about how that will result, look at the bookstores, look at Borders. So, I think the good news is that, like us, you can get ahead of that game and you can start doing something about it now. Think about, your category and whether there are, precursor behaviours that can lead you to people. Because the stuff I've talked about, it can be applied to, purchases of cars or soft drinks or whatever it might be. The same theory still works. Can you use different propositions to speak to different people? Can you use technology to, help, turn, a once-off customer into a customer for life? But the reality is that the change is coming. I'll give you one last thought, I suppose. So, only just a few years ago, my client would happily pay $15,000 to put an ad in the Saturday Age, for a role. And we would all sit back and we would pray that for the next 7 days that phone would ring just once. And that would be a return on our investment. Today, we can find people, we can, in some cases, find them before they're ready to find a role themselves. And we can engage them for $1 per click. So there is just a huge amount of change coming. So, thanks.